So when it comes to shaping, let's start with some stuff on the jaw, since that was our start point, right? It's a good place to begin. Now, there's a couple of little adjustments that we can make here for when the jaw opens, such as, in the throat, we can do a little bit of extra work on the throat skin there to make that come down some. But there's also a particularly interesting thing on the jaw that's easily not noticed, and it's what happens to the skin over the jawbone itself. Now, if you look at the skin, here at the tip of your chin, then obviously that just follows, right? As your jawbone opens and closes, that bit of skin comes along with it. What's more interesting is the skin back here near the ear. This patch of skin actually has the jawbone slide underneath it. Now, of course, as we have it rigged at the minute, it just comes along for the ride. Yep, it's just fully weighted in. Now, you can check this for yourself. It's easiest if you've got, facial hair or beard or some such, because then you can just sort of pinch the hairs and not the skin. But if you feel the skin around here, or hold on to some hairs of your beard, if you have one, and open and close your jaw, you'll find that the skin pretty much stays put. The jawbone displaces underneath the skin itself and the skin slides over it. Now, with just bones and weighting alone, this is an exceedingly difficult, if not near impossible, kind of an effect to try and create. It's also not particularly perfect with morphs. Obviously, the only way to do it perfectly and properly is with a skin sliding system, which is basically a muscle system where you have dynamic skin, like a cloth or a wrap deform that works over a bone and muscle system. But with a bit of care, we can actually get something pretty good using just morph adjustment. So let's pop over to our mesh here. I'm going to create a new morph map, which I'm just going to call jaw open. Now, what we want to do with this is we want to slide the skin up the jawbone itself. Now, a handy tool for this, if you have it, if you don't, it's free, is D-Uni-Slide, which is an edge sliding tool. Of course, any edge sliding tool will suffice, but I have this one. I'm a fan of it, so let's make some use of it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take just a couple of these edges at this bit, and I'm just going to slide them up towards the jaw. Just a little scotch there, not a huge amount. I'm going to take these guys here. I'm going to slide those, in this case, a bit more. Okay, like that. I'll take these fellas around here. You see that as I'm working along, I'm pulling in more and more edges, right? And I'm going to slide them right up to the actual point of the jaw there. Then take edges from here, slide them up a little bit. Just leave them where they are for the moment. Take some edges in here, slide those further up the face, just like that. Might just take this edge, slide it up a tiny bit as well. Come back, take these edges, slide them well up the face like that. And start taking these guys, slide them up more. Okay, and we'll get those ones again here, those up. And I'm also going to slide these down, so I get edges here. Actually, first of all, let me just get a little pull at the base of the ear. So I'll grab those and slide them down just a touch. Grab these guys, slide them down that away some. These here down and away, and these like that. Now you see what we're doing here is by doing that careful edge sliding, if we toggle the morph, you see we're basically keeping the shape of the jawline. We might have one or two little adjustments that we need to do after the fact on individual vertices like this to keep the shape right, but there we are pretty much holding the shape of the jawline unchanged. Now, when you are morphing, it is always important when you're doing morph corrections on things to make sure that they're nice and smooth. So we always pop in and out of sub patch so as we can find, places where we might have created an ugly kink, as we have done here. Okay, and we just want to start correcting any ugliness like that we've introduced. Nice clean lines that we're putting in, okay, because that will help us to reduce any distortion that might come as a result of our morph adjustment. Obviously is something we do not want. So there we go, we can look at that and just toggle back and forth. Yeah, we can see the difference that we're getting there. Okay, let's turn the sub patch back on. Now we can see, well, you can see from the edges, you can see how it is really sliding around that jawbone whilst holding the shape of the jawbone. So let's save that. We also said we were going to put some little correction on the throat. Yep, we don't need a separate morph for that. We can do it all in one. So let's get our draw open morph, and we'll use the slide again. I mean, you can use the sculpt tools or something if you prefer. Personally, I like the slide because it lets you slide things along shape of a mesh. Quite pleasing a way to work. There we go. You see that's also opened up a bit more space under here, which gives us a bit more collapse space for when the jaw comes down. Righto, so there's our morph adjustment for the jaw open. Is there anything else? Well, sure. I mean, you get changes in the cheeks and so on and so forth, right? But those we'll put into those specific areas. I mean, if we didn't have cheek controls or bones or whatnot, then we'd probably want to tie something in there for the jaw. But since we do have all of that, it will be better to tie them to those controls and bones specifically. So back over here, let's get our face, turn on nodes for its displacement, create a compound, let's have the DP bone info. We're of course getting the deform rig and the jaw bone. Morph map is of course the jaw open, and to begin with, let's just open our jaw here and plug that to the output just so we can have a look at how it is. There we see, we have a lovely little correction going on back there. See different levels that we can push it to, so let's just see what we want to do with it. Let's get the old vector scalar. We're coming from the bone's rotation, of course, and in this particular case, again, it's going to, what's that, 20 is 0.35. What's the sort of absolute craziest this could come to? Somewhere around there. Let's make that 100%, shall we? Which would be 0.56. In fact, easier than using our gradient in this case. You can just take a maths scalar, multiply, because 0.5, right, that's 56%, so let's just plug it into the multiply, and let's just multiply the radian value by 2. Now, we don't want it to go too crazily over, so let's just plug that into a clamp node, set the low to 0, the high to 1, plug that into our morph, so now it can never, morph below 0% or above 100%, and there we see the skin rolling over the jawbone as it comes down. Really nice effect. So that's pretty good. I like that a lot. It's really giving a fleshy feel at the back side of the jaw there. Let's just grab it in perspective mode so we can see it a little more clearly. There we go. You can see it really gets that, or begins at least to get that sense of a shape moving underneath the skin. Is it perfect? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, you can just go back and, of course, tweak the morph as you like it. Nothing wrong with that. But you can see that the method that we are using to create this additional shaping is actually quite a useful and a good one. Actually, all of a sudden, one additional adjustment does strike me, which is particularly handy, and that is what happens up near the ear here when your jaw is opening. Obviously you've got the bone displacing, but you've also got the muscle activating. So what you generally tend to see when a person's jaw does indeed, open, is that you get a little dip forming in here by the ear. So we can just put that in, just a little one, and you get a little bulge forming here as the muscle pops out. So we'll just pop that in there, and maybe we'll take this edge and just do a tiny little touch as well. So there we go. And of course, because that's a morph stored in the mesh, we don't need to do anything back in layout, because obviously it's just a morph, and so the change is automatically picked up there, and we've got that additional bit of shaping going on as well, which I think looks, yeah, really nice, works really well. Up next then, we'll do a couple of little tweaks on the chin, and we've got a tweak here for when the chin goes up. We put this little wrinkle in it along there, and we've also got one for the chin down, where we sort of point it a bit more down at the base corner here, and we also just sort of bring that fold in a little bit to just accentuate that crease. So we've got that. Of course, notice that these are just shape adjustments. You know, we are doing the chin rotation from the bone, of course, so we don't want to actually, you know, turn these vertices at all, try and turn the geometry. These are just sort of, you know, reshaping it somewhat. So over in here again, you know, very similar thing. Just create ourselves a little compound for the chin, making sure, of course, that we get that chin bone. We can remember that was base, so it was going from 0. And we're also only particularly interested, of course, in its pitch. But for this guy, of course, we are running it 2 ways, because we've got 2 morphs. And this is where our setup becomes slightly different, because of course we can't take a single alpha and plug it into both, can we? Because although we can get the alpha to output different amounts based on the bone rotation, it would then be driving each morph by the same amount at the same time. We could of course set up 2 gradients, so we have one gradient to drive one morph, another gradient to drive the other. But since gradients process colour keys, and colour being a triplet is the same as a vector, then we can do it all through the gradient. So let's get this as the chin up morph. Let's get the other one as the chin down. I could name them, but it's easy enough to remember. Up, down. Make sure they're set by default to 100%. And let's just have a look at the directions we're going. So chin down, that's going positive on the pitch there, and chin up is into the negative territory. So we're going to have some negative there. We'll get a key up there, that's key 2. We'll get a key down here, that's key 3. Yep, positive is down, so that's okay. We know that this is the down position, that's the up position. So we'll come to this first one, or key 2, we'll show output. Come to key 3, show output, which is really show input, but actually it means the output values. Let's close that for a second, and we connect the chin up morph to the key 2 colour, chin down morph to the key 3 colour. Let's see what we think our max chin down is likely to be. Probably going to be somewhere around here, isn't it? Let's say 40 degrees. What's that in radians? It's not so easy to spot it visually, but we can just easily do it with a formula. It's always easy to get degrees to radians. It's just number of degrees divided by, then brackets, 180 divided by pi. If I can correctly type pi. There we go. What's going to be the max up for the chin? Probably somewhere around there. Let's say 60 degrees. So the max up is going to be 60 divided by 180 over pi there. Just a little over 1. Make sure I can see it. Except it's going to be negative, sorry. There we go. So this is currently showing a colour of black, but actually the colour is the vector value of the morph displacement. Whereas here, at base, the colour is just 0, 0, 0, so no displacement. So this looks like a colour, it's actually a vector. Send that to our output. Here's our chin, plug that in, and what we see, you see we're getting the point at the base of the chin there, and there we're getting a crunch and a little fold as the chin comes up. So there we go, there's our morph adjustment for the chin. And of course, because that's all operating off the chin bone, which is in turn operating off all of the lip stuff, then we should see that as we pull the lip, there we go, we get our adjustment running in as well. And pull that, we, turn it more to accentuate it, should we be wanting to. Splendid. Next, we're going to deal with the sneer here. And what we're wanting for this, of course, is when you come up like this and make a sneer, sort of shape, then what you get invariably is that whole, cheek section here bulges out. Now, if we find that cheek bone to be here, then one way that we could, of course, attack this would be to, scale that bone out somewhat, right? But that requires having the bone oriented slightly differently, which in truth, we could do. It's free on the bank, right? We could have rotated it to the point on bank such that the, angle that the scale control was coming out at was in line. Rest it there, bring this up. Ordinarily that all behaves the same, but then we could scale it out on X like this. That is, of course, one way that we could, try and do this. That is perfectly fine. But of course, because we are taking fall off into the nose and various other bits as well, that can be a little, out of place. Also, you see that it's mainly affecting up here where the main body of the bone is. It's affecting much less down here by the naslab, because of course we've got bones in there that are holding that, so they would have to scale as well. As such, an easier way to deal with this is going to be to use the morph, because then we can also get the shaping much more specific. Because of course what you also see is you see the sharpening of the naslab crease, and you get little folding in the nose and stuff like that. We can work all of that in. Now you can do that with one morph. What I've decided to do here, because of course we have two bones in operation, is I'm going to divide the morph into two parts, and I'm going to operate them off each bone. So that will also give us a bit of subtlety whereby, if we're doing an adjustment here, we'll get a bit more bulge on one side than the other. So what I've got is this cheek bulge on the inside here, as you can see. Yeah, this cheek bulge in. Notice I am just coming out. I'm not squashing it as well, because the bone is scaling and that's doing the squashing. Yeah, so I've got that here. But then I've also got a cheek bulge out, which bulges at the outer part and also, of course, activates the wrinkles that we've got up here at the side of the eye. We need to be careful, of course, to make sure that they do, blend into one another smoothly, that you don't get some horrible, ugly fold in the middle. But that's, straightforward enough, and they're just done nice and smoothly with the magnet tool, so they, punch into one another nicely. And of course, we also split them up for left and right side, obviously enough. Then we have the setup here, which is pretty simple, no big deal. So this bone is the 5 left, which is of course the inside one, and this is the cheek 6, which is of course the outside one. These nodes up here are the left side, and this down here is just a copy for the right side. We're getting the Z scale of those bones. We've got of course the morph map for the in and the outer side, as you would expect. And then in the gradient, of course, we've just got a key at 1, which is scale 1 here, so it's at position 1, and that's outputting alpha 0, so of course that drives the morph to 0%. And then I've got a key here which is 0.6, so that's scale 0.6, and that's driving the morph to 100%. We add all 4 of those vectors together, pump them to our output, of course connect that up, and what we get is, as these come up, we're getting the bulging of the cheek there, like that. You can adjust how strong these are, so perhaps 60% is too much. Maybe it's having to shrink too far, so let's try it at 75, so it's not having to shrink quite as much to reach 100% morph. Yeah, so it's coming up more swiftly there, like this. And of course you can balance the two morphs and the rates at which they come in if you want. I've got them both going at the same amount here, but you could of course have one coming in at 75% stretch and the other coming in at 60% stretch, or whatever other value you found suited your character. And of course it's far easier to do that and sort of balance off the morphs than it is to try and keep going back and adjusting morphs to try and bulge the mesh a little more, a little less, and so on, to get the effect that you're after. And so we see, of course, when we pull on this first one, this sneer, because the second one also gets pulled owing to the the constraint, then we're getting a bit of the outer bulge come in as well, but of course when the outer one is fully pulled, then we get much more of it like that. So you have all of those adjustments, but of course it plays into the other stuff we've got. So the mouth lift there, as we lift the smile, then that gives us the adjustment here. Of course, if we were tweaking the actual what's it part for the NASLab fold, if we were just offsetting that slightly, we get the fall through going on. And of course when our jaw is squeezing closed like that, we're also getting an effect come in as well, because of course we get a slight squishing there on the NASLab that triggers our morph. So there we go, we get a nice sneer move with response up the cheek and the face there. See that all working quite nicely. We'll continue on then into this part of the cheek, the side area of the cheek, and deal with some additional shaping here. Of course, as we see on this character, he's got this kind of gaunt face. It's a bit fleshy and wrinkly and whatnot, and it's got this extra line going on here and this depression towards the back of the jaw there. And we already saw, of course, once we'd cut in these cheek bones, these cheek hold bones, that we were developing the additional creasing in there, that was behaving quite nicely with that movement. But we want to be able to attenuate this a little bit to account for how squashed or stretched the cheek is. So I've got two morphs in here. First of all, I've got a pull morph, which, as you can see, just accentuates that second little crease that's coming in on this edge down here, and which is also creating a bulge out here where we've got that little bulged bit of flesh. But what it's also doing is bulging out around here from its base position. There you can see it pops out a little bit. You could create another crease in here, we could do that, but it's quite uncommon to see that on faces, certainly on realistic faces. While you will see a good deal of the time that in extreme pulls and smiles and ease and whatnot, you can get a second crease forming on people's faces behind the crease at the NASLab fold. You can get a second crease. It's pretty uncommon to see a third one forming up as well. What normally happens to the flesh in this rear part of the cheek, close to the jaw, is of course as all of this pulls back and folds, that just tends to get bulged and pushed out. So as a result, our pull accentuates this first crease, but it smooths out and bulges slightly this rear side. Then we also have a cheek smooth, which just smooths out those creases completely to pull the cheek tighter, which will be to serve in those situations where of course the cheek is stretching, such as when the jaw is open and stuff like that. Now what we have here in the cheek is obviously we've got these different bones running at different angles, and there's a number of them together. So you might wonder, how do we tie all of this in? I mean, if I'm just going to use one, let's say we do the pull, most likely we'll have it running off of these two bones that are running from the ear to the mouth corner, right? But which one? Because of course one can squash whilst the other stretches and vice versa. So what do we really do with that? Plus the same question can be asked for the other two of how do they play in? Well, overall it's actually reasonably simple. So here we see the setup for it. We've got all four of the bones, and these are the 1, 2, 3 and 4 bones, okay, just as we've got them numbered there. So it's bone 1, 2, 3 and 4. And you notice what I'm doing, I'm taking the scaling from bone 1 and 2 and adding those together. So ordinarily then, at base, at rest, the value that is coming out of the scalar here is 2, yeah, because they're both just based at 1. And then I've got a gradient, and so of course at scale 2 we're going to output 0% morph, and then I've got here at scale 1 we're outputting 100% morph. Why scale 1? Because that represents each bone being at 50%. We feed that into our morph map to drive it, which is the cheek pull, and that gives us the morph output here. Meanwhile, we also take all 4 bone scales, add them together, get a scalar for that, which of course at base is 4. And we have another gradient where, of course, at a scale value of 4, we have no morph, and then here, at a scale value of 5, we have 100% morph. So that's an extra +1, right? That's the equivalent of each bone getting 25% stretch, or stretcher, times 1.25. So essentially, we're driving then this morph, which is the cheek smooth, as an average of the scale of all 4 bones, whilst the pull is just the average of those 2 bones. We add both of these morphs together, send them to our output, and of course that gives us the cheeks main set up there. And so, as a consequence of that, we can see that when we're, adjusting this here, we don't get a huge amount of difference if we just unhook that. You see, the difference is quite minimal. But as this starts to stretch down like this, we see that the cheek is smoothing. And as it stretches up, it's creasing ever more. And what we obviously see is when our mouth is pulled back like this, then, those 2 bones here are getting shrunk quite a bit, and we are getting quite the accentuated wrinkle and dimple on the face there, which is coming from our morph. And we then see that when the jaw opens, that is smoothing out. It's starting to dip down, and those creases are reducing. We might decide that asking each bone to go a full 1¼ times its scale is perhaps a bit much. What we've got here is, that's a pretty extreme pose for the jaw, right? If we just look at the scale values of those bones, well, these 2 aren't stretching much at all, 1.04 times, whilst the 3 and 4, they're just doing 1¼ times, a little over. So perhaps we set that instead of 5, maybe we put it at something like 4.6. And there we see that's now increased the amount of smoothing that we get from this pose. But that, of course, also replays when this moves around. So as that starts to come up, the crease there starts to return a little bit. So, of course, we've got a nice, 3-way play between all of these different controls, creating that cheek shape for us. So basically, there we have it all. That's, that'll do us for shaping in the lower face. For now, obviously, we'll probably come back and do some more on the upper face later, but we will, be done pretty much with the lower face, and we'll just move on. Of course, one of the important things to note about all of these shapes, for all of the extra little morph adjustments and whatnot that we've added on, none of them have really been pose control based. That is to say, we haven't used any morphs to get our face into a specific pose. We haven't, for instance, added on a morph to do, perhaps a little corner sharpening at the mouth corner or whatnot. We're just leaving that purely to the controllers. We haven't used any kind of morph adjustment to, change the nasolabial fold here as we're going in and out of smile or this, that or the other. Again, we try and, do all of this just on the controllers directly when we need to. And there are 2 reasons for this. One, of course, is the fact that, we are trying to have this bone-based rig here. That's part of, what we're demonstrating in this tutorial, is how to set these things up with all of these bone-based deformation controls. But the other reason for it comes back again to animation. For instance, you'll see if I hit play here, the pace at which my timeline is chugging along there. But if I bring up my face and I turn off the nodes, you can see that it speeds right up. The displacement morph nodes, do create a bit of slowdown in our scene. Not to mention, of course, the sub-patching, take it or leave it, however you have it. But the point of the deformation, the point of the displacement nodes, is the fact that when we are actually in the process of animating, we can largely turn them off in order to get faster scene response. So as when we are animating, it goes more quickly and the timeline's more responsive, and we can just scrub and playback and, you know, keep things playing at the exact rate without having to constantly build previews. But irrespective of the fact that we've got them turned off, we're not missing out on any posing. So that means we can go along, we can pose our face rig and manipulate the controls to get just the sort of, you know, tweak and expression on the lip shape, or, you know, where the jaw is, and so on and so forth. And the fact that we've got the nodes deactivated doesn't take us away from that. It's not like we'll turn them on and suddenly need to go back and tweak poses or add extra ones or anything. So keep that in mind when you are adding these morph corrections and, you know, morph adjustments to your own faces to bring them to life and give them that little extra bit, is that you do want to be using these things as complementary shapes rather than actual posing shapes.